Hello, this is the HAARP report. Today I'm going to show you a 1960 CIA document that created the secret weather warfare program. I'm sure Dane's followers have seen this years ago, but it's news to me. And also this ties straight into the coal spraying program, coal ash spraying program. So, so attached is a paper prepared by the research division of the Travelers Insurance Company. So why would a private corporation be secretly recommending weather weapons to the CIA? Who's Travelers Insurance Company? So Travelers Companies Inc. is now a $100 billion corporation, but they started in 1864 in Hartford, Connecticut. Hope you can see the cursor, it's very small. Among the firsts it had was the privately owned weather research facility, Travelers Weather Research Center. It was the first organization to state weather predictions and probabilities. For instance, 20% chance of rain. So who is Travelers Weather Research Center? So it only existed a few years, from 1954 to 1961, and Dr. Thomas Malone did work there, and it was the world's first privately owned research institute for scientific study of weather. So how did these guys come forward to the future? Do they still exist? Yes, they do. In 1961, Travelers formed a wholly owned subsidiary, Travelers Research Corporation, which still exists to this day, and they've done a lot of environmental work for the government. So let's look up Travelers Research Corporation. So this is the company as it exists now, TRC Companies Inc., and they offer environmental consulting, engineering, construction, management services, and one of the main things they do is, and it's down here in the middle, see if I can point that out, coal ash management. What an odd coincidence that the people who created the secret weather warfare programs are nowadays in coal ash management. So let's go back to the CIA document. Who is this guy Thomas Malone, Dr. Thomas Malone, and what kind of institutions might still exist after 50 or 60 years? So Dr. Thomas Malone passed away in 2013 at the age of 96. Coincidentally, seems like most of the big Illuminati live to be 96, and then they pass away at that magical number. But he got his Doctor of Science in 1946, and he's been one of the movers and shakers behind computational weather prediction. And to his credit, he stayed at Travelers Insurance until 1970. So once he saw this program get weaponized, it looks like he got out. So one of the things that he helped organize was the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in 1988. So this explains there must be a secret CIA control linkage there. That explains why the IPCC has consistently underestimated the severity of climate change and the rate that the climate is going to go into runaway heating. The reason is that IPCC does not model the melting permafrost and the CO2 and methane that releases, nor the melting Arctic Ocean and the amount of methane that those are going to release. You know, to his credit, he was a really good man. He was married for 70 years, firmly convicted. He was a man of deep faith. He was interested in the human prospect, whether or not we're going to survive on this planet and how long. Firmly committed to environmental conservation and sustainable development. You know, and to his credit, he got out of this in 1970. But this is typical of these secret programs that start out in a benevolent way and then are turned into genocide weapons. So let's summarize the CIA confidential document. So it wasn't secret, it wasn't top secret, it was the lowest level of classification, confidential. So here's some general introduction comments. And immediately we get into the second paragraph where he says, large-scale climate control requires modification of global weather patterns by altering and interfering with large-scale physical processes which are associated with the characteristic motions of the general circulation of the atmosphere. Here he's talking about controlling the jet stream, and this is now done. The offspring of the HAARP at Gakona, Alaska, now have this technology. By projecting megawatt microwave pinpoint beams into the ionosphere, you can cause that conductive gas to expand explosively and then press down into the jet stream. And these are the Aegis Navy ships and the SBX and many land-based, chiefly microwave, but some of the UHF type transmitters too. So he talks about other ideas have been proposed, and one of them is altering the surface albedo. In other words, the amount of light that the surface reflects. And this is the chemtrail program. That is the whole purpose of the chemtrail program, to change the albedo or try to reflect more sunlight. And I would, that's a very childish, simplistic analysis because it's very complex. There are actually two other purposes for chemtrails, one being to minimize the amount of water vapor that goes high up into the atmosphere because that's a powerful greenhouse gas, but that's been happening for millions of years. And when you get a lot of heating, you get clouds, and then you get rain, and then you get plant growth that pulls down carbon dioxide. So that's a bogus reason. The other reason would be to minimize the really powerful thunderstorms which inject water vapor actually high up into the stratosphere, where then it reacts with sulfur and destroys ozone. So that needs a lot more research. I'm not trying to support chemtrails in any way, no way. But the scientists that do this, they have these things and they're weighing them and trying to analyze. It's complex. Okay, so he says we'll change the surface albedo by any kind of thing that's different from the natural surface. Well, we see that every day pretty much. Another thing that's actually happening now is we'll put soot, layers of soot on the polar areas. Well, that's what all these mega fires are doing, and burning coal. That soot lands on these glaciers and the what's left of the North Polar ice cap and Antarctica. And an entirely new effect is happening now in Greenland, where a black algae is growing at the surface of the glacier, changing the albedo, absorbing the sunlight, and rapidly melting this ice. So this guy, this is totally being implemented now, and it's also out of our control. So here he actually mentions specifically the chemtrail program, or stratospheric aerosol injection. Other proposals are made to alter the energy balance of the atmosphere by injecting dust or other particulate matter into the high atmosphere, which might alter the input of solar energy to the atmosphere. So yes, absolutely, that's being done. Now this is the frightening thing, because this is being done by nature, and it's pretty much, well, let me read it. Proposals for altering the normal energy cycle of the atmosphere extend also to the alteration of the chemistry of atmospheric substances, especially in the high atmosphere, which might also affect the radiational balance. In other words, the stratosphere, what's happening with these greenhouse gases in the stratosphere. By burning coal, we release fluorine into the atmosphere, and this fluorine reacts with the hydrocarbons that are floating around in the atmosphere and breaks off a methane. Methane is very light. It floats up into the stratosphere, creating a super greenhouse warming effect. So burning coal releases fluorine, which leads to the super greenhouse effect because of the fluorine gas. HF, which turns into hydrofluoric acid, etc., etc. Anyway, so he was talking about doing it intentionally, but here we have done it like a 5-year-old playing with matches, and we burned the house down all around us by burning coal. I hope some of these politicians get educated on this issue, but no hope of that. Here he wants to alter the evaporation mechanisms at the surface of the planet. He was talking about putting some oil on large bodies of water. Well, except for accidents like the BP oil disaster, that doesn't happen. This is actually carried out by the chemtrail program. By basically chemtrailing creates the hot air layer, you have a thermal inversion, and then no rain. Here he's talking about a really obscure thing where you could modify the frictional drag coefficient of the surface, which would then change the wind. Well, that's happening in California right now with these forest fires. What used to be a high friction surface, meaning a forest, a pine forest, is now bare dirt with absorbing all of the heat from the sun. Disaster, absolute disaster. Here he's saying meteorology is so brand new. We're just now beginning to acquire computational capabilities to predict the weather. And here he's making the case for we really need some computers and some programs. And once we have that, boy, we can really, control the weather by 2025. Well, they beat that deadline. So he's just recommending some big powerful computers be purchased or rented. Now here's an interesting part, and I recommend you download this PDF. The link is in the description if you want to read all the wording. But it's a foundational document that created the program, so it's all very general. But here's something he says specifically that applies to the ionospheric heater and how they are able to control, how a small amount of energy is able to control a huge energy here at the surface. He's talking about trigger mechanisms that take advantage of vulnerable instabilities of the atmosphere. Well, that's sort of exactly what the ionospheric heaters do. By knowing where there's a branch point, by simulating, doing a really powerful computer simulation, you can heat the ionosphere, produce some high pressure in the jet stream, and then change something really big. But even now they have the capability of just really incredible amount of energy flooding down from the ionosphere. And I really need to go through the physics of that sometime, what little that I've been able to tease out. He says that we are going to have unlimited sources of energy from the atom and hydrogen fusion, so we should be able to apply this to these weather weapons. And that's just what Bernard Eastland said in his HAARP patent. They discovered a huge natural gas deposit on the north slope of Alaska, so he tried to come up with a way to burn that and use it as a weather weapon, and that's how HAARP got started. So again, this Dr. Malone was ahead of the curve, decades ahead. It has now become necessary for us to recognize the realities and potentialities of modern science for what they are and what they can mean for the possibilities of climate control. In other words, on the one hand, if we don't do it, the Russians are going to do it, and they're going to clobber us with this secret weapon. And on the other hand, we can ameliorate adverse precipitation or temperature regimes In other words, you can reclaim vast territories for agricultural and many other types of human activities. So here you got the carrot and the stick. The fear of the Russians is the stick, and here's the carrot. This is really good for humankind. It's going to be used to benefit everybody. Deserts can be made suitable for large-scale agricultural production. And this is how they get good people to begin to create these classified genocide programs. Holy cow, he says right here, such changes in circulation regimes can also affect the normal paths of destructive storms like hurricanes, such that their destructive energies could be dissipated in regions far removed from major human activities. This guy was 50 years ahead of his time. This is like the Bible for all these U.S. Navy programs and Air Force that are messing with the climate on a daily basis. And he also says ocean circulation patterns can be changed, and that will move the abundance and location of fertile fishing grounds. Well, guess what? That's happening. By keeping this drought high pressure over California, you don't have the normal wind patterns that cause upwelling of nutrient-rich waters off the coast of California, and then you don't have the plankton growing, and then all your seals are starving to death. And nobody's talking about fertilizing the oceans to correct these errors and start pulling down billions of tons of CO2. So anyway, this is like the genesis of the Bible here, only with better detail, in my opinion. And of course, this is a new type of warfare. So he's coming clean here. This is geophysical warfare. Our ability to control the weather can be used as a weapon. It will be useful in both hot and cold struggles. It can be used to affect an enemy adversely or benefit a friend. As a hot war weapon, we can do things like destroy the enemy's food production capability, or what was actually done in Vietnam was derangements of transportation systems. In other words, when we cloud seeded over the Ho Chi Minh Trail and flooded that trail and turned it into a river and a mud bog, this was exactly what he was talking about. And that's only 10 years after this document was written. And in my opinion, even worse, as a Cold War tool, climate control can be used to ameliorate weather for friendly and uncommitted nations as a means of strengthening bonds with this country. In other words, if someone is kind of, well, I don't know if we really want to ally with you, USA, you just tell them, well, look out, you're going to have a drought, you're going to have a flood if you don't prop up the dollar, give whatever financial goals they have in mind. So this is gangsterism, this is extortion, and this is actually being done with the Gulf Coast cities, that they have to pay their weather futures contracts protection money or they get flooded out. Maybe Houston did not pay their protection money for 2017, and that's why Hurricane Harvey moved over them and just flooded the crap out of them. And my internet was off for 5 days, so I didn't get to look at it. So anytime my internet goes off, I should be trying to get on somewhere so I can see what's going on. And then you have to worry about or wonder about Indonesia and Guam and Malaysia, these Muslim nations. They've been having devastating hurricanes. Is this part of this Cold War tool? Personally, I don't know, but I wouldn't doubt it. So an absolutely necessary countermeasure is that the U.S. must have the knowledge on how to combat any such attempts at control by other nations. And we do have that. It's called the U.S. Navy Aegis ships, the SBX, all of these powerful microwave transmitters. And God forbid, maybe they're out in space now. I don't know. But everything he wrote in this document is basically come to pass. So failure to undertake a consistent program could lead to another Sputnik situation where the Russians are ahead of us. There's the fear card again. So the actual program is going to be, number one, read everything that the Russians have written. And then lots of scientific work, building some lab, creating some computer models, lab setups, and again this boundary layer friction stuff, which who cares, that's small scale. Okay, so here he's actually setting up the program, recommending scientists be hired, clear need to undertake this type of studies, and theoretical climate control experiments as justified by state-of-the-art. In other words, let's start spraying people and cities with different things and see what happens. And that did start happening right after 1960. And I'm going to upload another video where a guy worked chemtrail creation 1980 to about 2000. And he thought at the time the chances of attaining feasible climate control methods are extremely small. I'd say that's the one statement in this whole document that's actually wrong. It's not small, it's 100%. So surveillance and evaluation of the existing state-of-the-art. This is why this was brought to CIA, because it is actually beginning a new spying program on the Russians. Surveillance program will permit isolation of promising developments. So if the Russians are doing anything good, we want to know about it. And under supplementary research, he actually recommends the creation of modern weather satellites which can look at different spectra. He says information on space and time spectra will be required of various atmospheric energy and momentum exchange processes. In other words, this sentence here became all of our weather satellites, and especially things like GOES 16, which is so powerful. He's saying we need to make computer models that will require long integration periods. Long periods of integration will be required. In other words, you had those vacuum tubes pulling down kilowatts of power to do simple computations. So again, he was right about this. So this guy is the father of computer climate modeling, and it looks like the CIA have been running this longer than anybody. Personnel and program costs. Here he actually recommends who should be hired: meteorologist, physicist, mathematician, analyst, programmers, and recommends how much salary: $225,000 a year total. With the computer time, maybe $75,000. So for $300,000 a year, CIA gets a whole arsenal of new top secret weapons. And that's the end of this document. If you're curious as to any other details it might have, go ahead and download a copy. But I'm sure Dane and his group have covered this years ago, but it was news to me. It was sent to me in a comment, so thank you very much for that. If you think this research is helpful, please throw me $1 on Patreon. I'd really appreciate it. And also look at my other video, which is from a guy who says, I designed chemtrails for 17 years for the government, and I'll be uploading that video shortly. Thanks a lot for watching.